New Orleans, March 1844. In the grand rotunda of the street Louis Hotel, beneath crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon light like frozen fire, an auction took place that would be whispered about for generations. A woman, her name recorded only as Marguerite in the ledger, sold for $13,000. To understand how impossible this figure was, consider that a prime male field hand, young and strong, rarely exceeded 1,500. An educated house servant might command 2,000. Even the most sought-after women in the fancy trade, those sold specifically for their beauty and light complexion, topped out at 5,000 on extraordinary occasions. $13,000 shattered every precedent. Within 3 weeks of that auction, 2 of New Orleans' wealthiest men would be found dead under circumstances the authorities would refuse to investigate. Within 6 months, a third man would vanish entirely, leaving behind a mansion filled with strange artifacts and a journal written in a cipher no one could break. The newspaper archives from that spring contain peculiar gaps, entire editions missing from the historical record, as if someone methodically erased evidence of what truly occurred in the city's most elite circles. What made this particular woman valuable enough to drive men to financial ruin? What secrets did her sale conceal that powerful forces worked desperately to bury? The answer lies not in the auction itself, but in the careful orchestration of events that brought Marguerite to New Orleans in the first place. The spring of 1844 found New Orleans drunk on cotton wealth and international commerce. The city sprawled along the Mississippi like a jewel box spilled open, its streets a chaos of languages, French and English and Spanish and Creole patois, mixing in the humid air. Steamboats lined the levee 3 deep, their smokestacks painting the sky gray, their cargo holds disgorging wealth from upriver plantations. The slave trade had reached heights of sophistication that transformed human beings into finely categorized merchandise. Each type assigned its specific value, its particular market. Among the city's commercial elite, 3 men dominated the luxury end of the trade. The market for what was delicately termed fancy girls, women of mixed heritage, light-skinned and educated, sold to wealthy planters as mistresses or to madams running the city's most exclusive establishments. These 3 men existed in ruthless competition, each seeking the acquisitions that would cement their supremacy. Auguste Levo controlled the premier auction house on Chartres Street. His family had been traders for 3 generations, their wealth built on understanding exactly what their clients desired before the clients themselves knew. Auguste was a thin man in his 50s, impeccably dressed, his manners refined to the point of parody. He spoke 5 languages fluently and could assess a slave's value with a single glance, reading bloodlines in bone structure, estimating education from the way a person held their hands. His reputation for discretion made him indispensable to buyers who preferred their acquisitions to remain unrecorded in public documents. The second man, Etienne Rousseau, represented newer money but perhaps sharper instincts. He'd arrived in New Orleans 15 years earlier from Saint-Domingue, one of the few wealthy refugees who'd escaped that island's revolution with capital intact. He'd rebuilt his fortune through aggressive speculation and an uncanny ability to predict market shifts. His auction house on Royal Street catered to the city's newest millionaires, men who wanted to display their wealth through extravagant purchases. Etienne himself was a broad-shouldered man with dark eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they observed, including people. The third man, Christophe Mercier, came from old Creole aristocracy. His family's wealth predated Louisiana's American purchase, built on sugar plantations and strategic marriages to Spanish colonial families. Christophe operated his business from a private gallery in the French Quarter, never advertising, never soliciting clients. His buyers came to him through whispered recommendations in gentlemen's clubs and private salons. He dealt in what he called singular acquisitions, slaves so exceptional that their sale became an event rather than a transaction. These 3 men circled each other like sharks, their rivalry carefully masked by social politeness, but evident in every business decision. Each sought the purchase that would definitively establish his dominance. Each searched constantly for merchandise that would make his competitors weep with envy. It was into this environment that rumors began circulating in late February 1844. A slave trader named Baptiste Fournier, known for operating along the Atlantic coast and in the Caribbean, had arrived in New Orleans with an unusual acquisition. Fournier was not well liked among his peers. He worked alone, maintained no permanent residence, and dealt in what other traders called problematic merchandise. Slaves with complicated histories, people whose documentation raised questions, goods that commanded extraordinary prices from very specific buyers willing to overlook irregularities. Fournier took rooms at a modest hotel on Rampart Street, far from the grand establishments where visiting merchants typically stayed. He made no announcement of his arrival, placed no advertisements in the newspapers, conducted no business at any of the established auction houses. This silence itself became currency. In a trade built on public competition and visible bidding, Fournier's discretion suggested something beyond the ordinary. The whispers started in the coffee houses along Exchange Alley. A woman of extraordinary beauty, not merely attractive, but possessing an almost otherworldly quality that made grown men forget their own names when they looked at her. The rumors took on mythical dimensions. Talk of features that seemed painted by Italian masters, eyes that held ancient intelligence, bearing that suggested royalty rather than bondage, a voice that could make men confess their darkest secrets. Auguste Levo first heard about Fournier's acquisition during a business lunch at Antoine's. The man who mentioned it, a cotton factor named Philippe Deschamps, had apparently glimpsed the woman during a chance encounter on Dauphin Street. Deschamps described walking past Fournier and his charge near the French market and finding himself so transfixed that he'd actually stopped mid-stride, causing a lady behind him to stumble and curse him in rapid Creole. "I have been in this business 30 years, Deschamps said, his voice barely above a whisper, leaning close across the linen tablecloth. "I have seen thousands upon thousands, quadroons from the finest families, octoroons educated in Paris, women who could pass for white in any northern city. Nothing, and I mean nothing, Auguste, prepared me for what I saw that morning. It was not just her face, though God help me, her face alone could launch ships. It was something in her eyes, the way she moved despite the circumstances. Like she was tolerating this indignity temporarily, like she knew something profound that we did not." Auguste dismissed the story initially as the kind of exaggeration men indulged in after too much wine at lunch, but the description troubled him. He'd built his reputation on finding the exceptional, on offering his clients what they could obtain nowhere else. The idea that something truly extraordinary had arrived in New Orleans without his knowledge felt like a professional failure. He made inquiries. Carefully, discreetly, he learned that Fournier was preparing to leave New Orleans within 10 days, having apparently found no buyers interested in merchandise priced at what Auguste's sources claimed was an absolutely insane figure. $12,000 was the number being quoted. The sum was so astronomical it suggested either madness or something genuinely unprecedented. On a grey afternoon in early March, Auguste Levo arranged a private viewing. Fournier received him in his hotel room, a cramped space that smelled of cigar smoke and the peculiar mustiness that clung to buildings in the quarter. The trader was a weathered man in his 60s, his skin the color of old leather, his hands marked with scars that suggested a violent past. When he spoke, his accent carried traces of Saint-Domingue French mixed with something else, perhaps Cuban Spanish. "I appreciate discretion, Monsieur Levo," Fournier said, gesturing to a chair that had seen better decades. "Your inquiry came through proper channels. That speaks well of your reputation." "I understand you have something unusual," Auguste replied, maintaining the professional courtesy that governed such negotiations, even as his curiosity burned. "I am here to determine if the rumors justify the extraordinary price I have heard mentioned." Fournier smiled, an expression that held no warmth whatsoever. "The price is firm. I should make this absolutely clear from the outset. 12,000 in gold or bank draft. I will not negotiate. I will not accept promises of future payment. I will not be persuaded by appeals to friendship or business relationships I do not have. What I have is unique. The price reflects that uniqueness. Then, perhaps you should show me what justifies such remarkable confidence. Fournier walked to an interior door and knocked twice, a specific rhythm. A moment passed. Then the door opened, and Auguste Levo encountered the woman who would haunt his dreams until the day he died. She stood perhaps 5 feet 6 inches tall, neither short nor imposing, but her posture suggested someone accustomed to commanding rooms. Her skin held that particular honey-gold color that in New Orleans marked her as what the traders called a fancy, likely 1/8 or 1/16 African heritage. Enough to be legally enslaved, but light enough to move in white society under the right circumstances. Her features possessed a symmetry that Auguste, who had studied faces professionally for decades, recognized as genuinely rare. High cheekbones, a delicate nose, lips that curved naturally into an expression suggesting either amusement or contempt, it was impossible to determine which. But it was her eyes that struck Auguste silent. They were an unusual shade of amber, almost gold in the lamplight, and they held an intelligence that went beyond mere cleverness. When she looked at him, Auguste felt assessed, evaluated, judged. The sensation was profoundly unsettling. Slaves were supposed to avert their eyes, to demonstrate submission through posture and gaze. This woman did neither. She looked directly at Auguste, unflinching, as if she were the buyer evaluating merchandise rather than the merchandise being evaluated. She wore a dress of deep blue silk, simple in cut but clearly expensive, the kind of garment a wealthy planter's daughter might wear to church. No chains, no visible restraints. She stood with her hands clasped loosely before her, perfectly still, perfectly composed. Yet Auguste sensed a coiled energy in her, like a spring compressed and waiting for release. "Her name is Marguerite," Fournier said quietly. 26 years old, born in Charleston, educated privately in ways I am not at liberty to discuss. She reads and writes fluently in English, French, and Spanish. She has training in music, literature, mathematics, and household management. She has never worked in fields, never been subjected to brutal labor. Her skin is unmarked, her health is excellent. She possesses talents that would take me hours to enumerate completely. Auguste circled her slowly, examining her as he would a piece of sculpture in a gallery. Marguerite remained motionless, her breathing slow and steady, but Auguste felt her awareness tracking him like a physical touch. When he moved behind her, he sensed her calculating his position, measuring the distance between them. "Let me see your hands," Auguste said. Marguerite raised her hands, palms upward. The fingers were long and elegant, the nails neatly shaped. No calluses, no marks of manual labor. These were hands that had held pens and books, and perhaps musical instruments, not tools or laundry or kitchen implements. "Look at me," Auguste commanded, testing her obedience. Marguerite raised her eyes to meet his. For a moment that stretched far too long for comfort, they simply looked at each other. Auguste felt something pass between them, some current of understanding or recognition that had no business existing between a slave trader and merchandise. Her eyes held no fear, no submission. Only a calm certainty that made Auguste want to step backward, though he held his ground through sheer pride. "Why has she not sold?" Auguste asked Fournier, breaking the eye contact deliberately. "If she is everything you claim, why are you still in New Orleans? Someone should have purchased her immediately." Fournier's expression darkened. The men in this city lack vision. They see a beautiful woman and assume she has been kept as a concubine, that she is damaged in ways that make her unsuitable for respectable households. They are wrong, but their prejudice has created an opportunity for someone with more sophisticated understanding. What is her history? I need to know exactly what I would be purchasing. Her history is complex. She was raised in a Charleston household of considerable refinement, educated alongside the family's legitimate children, employed for years in capacities that required discretion and intelligence. The family encountered financial reversals and was forced to liquidate certain assets. I acquired her through legitimate channels with complete documentation. Everything is legal and transferable. Auguste heard the careful gaps in this narrative, the places where Fournier deliberately omitted details. No trader was entirely forthcoming about provenance, but Fournier's evasiveness seemed more calculated than usual. Still, Auguste's mind was already racing ahead to possibilities. A woman of Marguerite's appearance and obvious education would cause a sensation in New Orleans. She could serve in a wealthy household as a companion to lonely wives, or be placed in one of the city's elite brothels, where she would command prices that would make her owner wealthy within months. Or, and this thought excited Auguste most, she could be sold at public auction with appropriate publicity, creating a bidding war that would establish his house as the premier destination for truly exceptional merchandise. "I will need documentation," Auguste said. "Complete provenance, proof of ownership, transfer papers, everything legally required to establish clear title." "Of course. Everything is prepared and waiting for your attorney's review. The question is whether you are prepared to meet my price." Auguste studied Marguerite one more time. She had not moved, had not spoken, had simply stood there being examined like furniture, yet he sensed an active mind behind those amber eyes. Thoughts and calculations he could not begin to guess. What did she think of this transaction? What did she feel being discussed as property? The questions surprised him. He had bought and sold hundreds of slaves over his career and never once wondered about their interior lives. Why now? Why her? 12,000, Auguste said finally. "I will have my bank prepare the draft. We can complete the transaction tomorrow at my attorney's office on Louis Street. Fournier nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. "Tomorrow then, 2 o'clock. Bring the draft and I will bring all documentation. Monsieur Levo, you have made a decision that will define your reputation for the remainder of your career. Marguerite will prove worth every dollar." As Auguste left the hotel, stepping back into the humid afternoon air of the quarter, he felt a strange mixture of excitement and unease. He had just committed to the largest single purchase of his career. Auguste's wife would be horrified when she learned the sum. His business partners would question his judgment, but once they saw Marguerite, once they understood what she represented, all doubts would vanish. He was certain of it. What Auguste Levo could not know, as he walked back through the narrow streets toward his office, was that he had just set in motion a sequence of events that would destroy not only his own life, but the lives of the two men who competed with him. The woman he had agreed to purchase carried with her a mystery far more dangerous than beauty, and the price he would ultimately pay would prove infinitely higher than $12,000. The transfer of ownership occurred precisely as arranged. Auguste arrived at his attorney's office with a bank draft for $12,000 drawn on the Citizens Bank of Louisiana. Fournier produced documentation that appeared, at first examination, entirely legitimate. A bill of sale from a Charleston estate belonging to a family named Whitmore. Transfer papers showing Fournier's acquisition 6 months prior. Letters of character reference describing Marguerite's education and temperament, signed by someone identified as Mrs. Catherine Whitmore. The attorney, a meticulous man named Henri Toussaint, who had handled slave transactions for Auguste's family for 20 years, examined everything with his customary thoroughness. He held papers up to the light, checking for alterations. He compared signatures across multiple documents, searching for inconsistencies. He questioned Fournier about specific dates and locations mentioned in the provenance chain. "Everything appears legally sufficient," Toussaint finally announced. "The documentation establishes clear title. Monsieur Levo, once you sign here, Marguerite becomes your legal property under Louisiana law." Auguste signed without hesitation. Fournier signed opposite. Money and papers changed hands with the mechanical efficiency of countless similar transactions. Marguerite stood silently throughout the entire proceeding, her face composed, her amber eyes fixed on some middle distance, her breathing slow and steady. She showed no reaction to her change in ownership, no emotion visible in her features. "One piece of counsel," Fournier said as he prepared to leave, his hand resting on the door handle. "Marguerite requires careful management. She is not like other slaves you have handled. Treat her harshly, and she will become difficult in ways that will frustrate you. But treat her with a measure of respect, not as an equal, you understand, but with acknowledgement of her capabilities, and she will exceed every expectation you might have." "I have managed valuable property for 30 years, Auguste replied somewhat stiffly. "I understand how to maximize the return on exceptional merchandise." "Of course. I am sure you do." Fournier tipped his hat and departed, leaving New Orleans that same afternoon on a steamboat bound for Mobile. He would never return to the city, and attempts to locate him in subsequent months would prove entirely fruitless. Baptiste Fournier, it seemed, had vanished from the slave trade as completely as if he had never existed. Auguste brought Marguerite to his home on Esplanade Avenue that evening. The house was a testament to 3 generations of trading wealth, a Greek revival mansion with galleries wrapped around both floors, tall windows that caught the river breeze, and gardens that bloomed year-round with jasmine and oleander. Auguste's wife, Marie-Claude, had furnished it with pieces imported from France, carpets from Brussels, paintings by minor European masters. Everything announced taste, refinement, and the financial resources to indulge both. Marie-Claude's reaction to Marguerite proved even more dramatic than Auguste had anticipated. His wife, a small woman with sharp features and sharper business instincts, descended the main staircase to greet the new acquisition. She stopped mid-step when she saw Marguerite standing in the entrance hall, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock to something approaching fear. "Auguste," Marie-Claude said quietly, her voice tight, "what have you brought into our home?" "The finest acquisition of my career. Look at her, Marie-Claude. Truly look. Have you ever seen anything comparable?" Marie-Claude did look, her dark eyes moving over Marguerite with an assessment born of decades evaluating merchandise. Auguste watched his wife's face cycle through emotions, professional appreciation for obvious value warring with something else, some instinctive wariness that Marie-Claude could not quite articulate. "She is extraordinary," Marie-Claude admitted finally. "But Auguste, there is something about her that troubles me. Something in her eyes. This woman has secrets. All exceptional slaves have complicated histories. That is what makes them exceptional. No, this is different. I cannot explain it, but I feel it. This woman is dangerous." Marguerite, who had stood silently during this exchange, showed no reaction to being discussed as if she were not present. Her face remained carefully neutral, her posture unchanged. But Auguste noticed the faintest flicker of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps contempt, crossing her features before vanishing. "She will be quartered in the third-floor room," Auguste said, ending the discussion. "The one with the separate entrance. I want her close, but apart from the other household slaves. She is not to mix with them unnecessarily." The Levos employed 14 slaves in their town residence. Kitchen workers, housemaids, a coachman, a gardener, and several body servants who attended to the family's personal needs. All were skilled, all valuable, but none approached Marguerite's obvious refinement or her unsettling presence. The decision to quarter her separately in what had been a guest room spoke to her unique status in the household hierarchy. Over the following week, Auguste introduced Marguerite carefully into his business operations. He discovered that Fournier had not exaggerated her abilities. She could calculate complex figures in her head faster than Auguste could write them. She could read contracts in 3 languages and identify problematic clauses that might create future legal difficulties. She could assess slaves brought to Auguste for purchase or sale, reading bloodlines and education levels with accuracy that matched his own hard-earned expertise. More remarkably, she could manage the delicate social dimensions of Auguste's business. When wealthy planters visited to discuss potential purchases, Marguerite served wine and refreshments with such grace that guests invariably commented on her. When their wives accompanied them, which sometimes happened despite the delicate nature of the business being discussed, Marguerite could engage them in conversation about music, literature, and current events with enough sophistication to put them at ease while never overstepping the boundaries of her station. "She is remarkable," a planter from Ascension Parish told Auguste during one such visit. "Where on earth did you find her? I have never encountered a slave with such refined manners." "A fortunate acquisition from Charleston," Auguste replied smoothly. "One occasionally discovers true quality if one knows where to look." But privately Auguste shared some of his wife's unease. Marguerite was almost too perfect. Her compliance seemed performed rather than genuine, a role being played for an audience that included Auguste himself. He would catch her sometimes, late at night when she thought herself unobserved, standing at the third-floor window, looking out over the city with an expression on her face that suggested not captivity but patience, as if she were waiting for something, as if all of this was temporary and she knew exactly how long the temporariness would last. The unease deepened when Etienne Rousseau appeared at Auguste's door 3 days after Marguerite's arrival. The younger trader was agitated, his usual calculated composure replaced by barely controlled urgency. "I want to buy your new acquisition," Etienne announced without preamble, refusing Auguste's offer of coffee. "The woman, Marguerite. Name your price." Auguste blinked in surprise. "She is not for sale, Etienne. I just purchased her. She has proven invaluable to my business operations." $20,000. That is nearly double what you paid. Auguste, think about it. That is an extraordinary profit for 3 days of ownership. How do you even know what I paid? Etienne waved his hand dismissively. "I make it my business to know these things. 20,000, Auguste, in gold if you prefer. That is my offer." The answer is no. Marguerite has capabilities that exceed any amount of money you might offer. She is worth more to me in service than she would be as a sale. Etienne's face darkened, color rising in his cheeks. 25,000 then. That is my absolute final offer. Auguste, be reasonable. No slave is worth refusing such a sum. Even if I were inclined to sell, which I am not, why would you pay such an absurd price? What possible use could she be to you that would justify $25,000? For a long moment, Etienne stared at Auguste without speaking. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, "You do not understand what you have in your house, do you? You think she is simply an unusually beautiful and educated slave. But there is something else about her, something that could be valuable in ways you have not yet recognized." "What are you talking about?" "I have made inquiries about the man who sold her to you, Baptiste Fournier. Do you know Fournier's reputation before he arrived in New Orleans? He did not trade in ordinary merchandise, Auguste. He specialized in very particular types of slaves, sold to very particular buyers, private collectors, people willing to pay extraordinary sums for slaves with extraordinary attributes." Auguste felt cold sweat prickling along his spine. "What are you implying?" "I am implying nothing. I am stating facts. Fournier disappeared from New Orleans immediately after your purchase. No forwarding address, no indication of where he went or what business he might be pursuing. That is suspicious, would you not agree? And the documentation he provided, have you verified it thoroughly? Actually traced it back to this Whitmore family in Charleston? My attorney examined everything. The papers were legally sufficient. Papers can be forged, Auguste. Signatures can be copied. I would wager that if you investigate thoroughly, you will find inconsistencies, questions without satisfactory answers. And when you find those questions, you will wish you had accepted my offer." Auguste's unease crystallized into genuine alarm. "Even if what you suggest were true, it does not explain your interest in purchasing Marguerite. What do you know that I do not?" Etienne leaned forward, his voice dropping to near whisper. 4 days ago, Christophe Mercier approached me with a proposition. He wanted to know if I would facilitate stealing Marguerite from your household. He offered me $5,000 just to arrange the theft, with promise of another $5,000 once she was safely in his possession. I declined, of course. I am a businessman, not a criminal. But it tells you something, does it not, about what Mercier thinks she is worth? Auguste sat back, his mind reeling. Why would Christophe want her so desperately? That is what I have been trying to determine. I have asked questions, made inquiries through my contacts up and down the coast, and I have learned some very interesting things, Auguste. Things that suggest Marguerite might not be who Fournier claimed she was. There are rumors, just whispers, mind you, nothing confirmed. But they suggest that a certain prominent Charleston family lost someone about 3 years ago. A young woman, educated, refined, known for her striking appearance. The family claimed she had died of fever, but there were irregularities in their story. No death certificate was ever filed, no grave marker was ever placed. The family refused all inquiries from friends and distant relatives. Auguste felt his stomach tighten. What was the family's name? Whitmore. Catherine Whitmore was the mother. The same name on Marguerite's documentation. But Etienne, the papers identify Catherine Whitmore as the owner, not as the mother of a free woman who was illegally enslaved? Exactly. Auguste, I cannot prove that Marguerite is the missing Whitmore daughter. I cannot even prove such a daughter existed, as the family has been remarkably effective at suppressing information. But if she were, if Marguerite is actually a free-born woman who was illegally enslaved, do you understand what that would mean? Auguste understood perfectly. It would mean that Marguerite's enslavement was not only illegal but criminal. It would mean that Fournier had trafficked in kidnapped free persons. And it would mean that Auguste had unknowingly participated in that crime by purchasing her. The legal ramifications would be catastrophic, the social consequences even worse. The Levo family name, built over 3 generations, would be destroyed in scandal. This is speculation, Auguste said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. You have no proof. I have enough to make both Christophe Mercier and myself willing to pay extraordinary sums to acquire Marguerite. Enough to bring me to your door on a Thursday morning to make you an offer that should be impossible to refuse. Think about it, Auguste. $25,000. Take the money. Let me handle whatever complications might arise from Marguerite's past. Wash your hands of the entire situation. Auguste studied Etienne carefully. The man was a skilled negotiator, expert at reading people and exploiting their fears. Was this elaborate story simply a tactic to acquire Marguerite at profit? Or was there genuine substance to these claims about the Whitmore family? I need time to investigate your claims, Auguste said finally. Give me 1 week to make inquiries in Charleston to verify what you have told me. If I find evidence supporting your theory, we will discuss terms. Etienne stood, clearly unhappy with this response, but recognizing he had pushed as far as prudence allowed. 1 week. Auguste, but I warn you, Mercier will not wait indefinitely. If he cannot purchase Marguerite through legitimate means, he may resort to other methods. And unlike me, Christophe has no scruples about employing violence to get what he wants. After Etienne departed, Auguste sat alone in his office for a long time, staring at the papers Fournier had provided. He pulled out a magnifying glass and examined signatures more carefully than Toussaint had done. He held pages up to the window, looking for watermarks or signs of alteration. Everything appeared genuine, but Etienne's warning echoed in his mind. Papers can be forged. Finally, Auguste rang for Marguerite. She appeared within minutes, her expression composed and attentive as always. You called for me, Monsieur Levo. Auguste studied her face, searching for any hint of deception or hidden identity. Marguerite bore the scrutiny calmly, neither defiant nor submissive, simply waiting with that patience he had come to recognize as characteristic of her. Tell me the truth, Auguste said quietly. Who are you really? Not the history Fournier provided. The truth. Something flickered across Marguerite's face. Surprise, perhaps. Or relief. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful neutrality Auguste had come to expect. What truth would you like to hear, Monsieur Levo? Marguerite asked softly. The truth of what I was, or the truth of what I have become? Both. Marguerite was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight it had not held before, as though she were finally allowing something genuine to emerge from behind the performance. I was born free in Charleston. My father was a merchant. My mother came from a family with French colonial wealth. I received education appropriate to my station. I had prospects, expectations of a future that included choice and agency. Then, my father died. Debts emerged that no one had known existed. My mother remarried quickly, desperately, to a man who saw me not as a stepdaughter, but as an asset that could be liquidated. He manufactured documentation, created a false history, sold me to Fournier to discharge gambling debts. My mother, she looked away. She chose her new husband's financial stability over her own daughter's freedom. The Whitmore family, Auguste said. Marguerite's eyes widened slightly. You have been making inquiries. Etienne Rousseau was just here. He told me things. Are you Catherine Whitmore's daughter? I was. The simple past tense carried enormous weight. That woman is dead to me, as I am dead to her. She had my death registered to make the story cleaner, to prevent questions. As far as Charleston society knows, Eleanor Whitmore died of yellow fever in June of 1841. Auguste felt his world tilting. Eleanor. Your real name is Eleanor Whitmore. Was Eleanor Whitmore. Now I am Marguerite, with no family name, just Marguerite, a slave worth $12,000 to you and apparently more to your competitors. Why did you not protest? Auguste demanded, anger rising. Why did you not speak up when Fournier sold you to me? Why did you not say something at the attorney's office? Marguerite's expression hardened. And say what exactly? Who would have believed me? A woman in chains claiming to be free-born. Fournier had documents, signatures, seemingly legitimate papers. I had nothing but my word. Would your attorney have sided with me over Fournier's documentation? Would you have? Auguste had no answer. She was right. No one would have believed her. The word of a claimed slave against documented proof of ownership. Louisiana law would have sided with the documentation every time. If you are free-born, Auguste said slowly, then you have rights under law. I should, arrange your release, return you to your family. My family is the reason I am in this situation, Marguerite said bitterly. Do you think I was kidnapped off the street like some common victim? My own stepfather orchestrated this, Monsieur Levo. He created the false papers. He sold me to discharge his debts. My mother chose to protect him, rather than me. So forgive me if I do not share your optimism about the possibility of returning home to Charleston. There is nothing there for me but people who prove they value money more than they value me. The revelation stunned Auguste into silence. He had heard of such things, desperate families selling their mixed-race children, hoping to pass them off as slaves to settle debts, but always as distant rumors, never as immediate reality, confronting him in his own office. Why are you telling me this now? Auguste asked finally. Because Rousseau is correct to warn you about Mercier. Christophe Mercier knows who I am. He knows what I represent, and he wants me not as a slave, but as leverage against my family. My stepfather, before selling me, had accumulated debts to Mercier as well. Debts he never paid. Mercier has been trying to collect for 3 years. If he acquires me, he will use me to extract far more than $25,000 from my mother and stepfather. He will bleed whatever remains of the Whitmore fortune dry, then expose the scandal anyway, simply for the pleasure of destroying them. How do you know this? Because I am not deaf, Monsieur Levo. I hear conversations in this house. I observe who visits and why. I have pieced together information from fragments of overheard discussions and careful questions. Mercier has been planning this for months. Rousseau's offer today was not generosity. It was an attempt to outmaneuver Mercier before Mercier makes his move. Then what should I do? Marguerite smiled. But there was no humor in it. Only a cold calculation that made Auguste suddenly remember his wife's warning. That depends on what kind of man you are. You could sell me to Rousseau and profit handsomely. You could sell me to Mercier and profit even more, though at greater moral cost. Or, Marguerite paused, and in that pause Auguste heard the real proposal forming. Or you could do something neither man expects, which is, you could help me disappear. The suggestion hung in the humid air of Auguste's office like smoke. He stared at Marguerite, seeing not a slave but a woman trapped by circumstances beyond her control, yet still fighting to survive with whatever tools remained available to her. "If I help you," Auguste said slowly, "I make enemies of both Rousseau and Mercier. They will not forgive what they will see as betrayal. Neither man takes well to being denied what he wants. No, they will not. But if you sell me to either of them, you will never know a moment's peace. The truth will emerge eventually. It always does. And when it does, you will be implicated in a scandal that will destroy your family's reputation just as surely as it would destroy mine. At least, if I disappear, you can claim ignorance. Say I ran away, that you were deceived by Fournier just as much as anyone else." Auguste considered the options before him. Every path led to risk. Every choice carried consequences that could ripple through his life in unpredictable ways. But Marguerite was correct about one thing. The truth had a way of surfacing no matter how deeply buried. Better to act now while he still had some control over the situation than to wait for disaster to arrive at his doorstep. "1 week," Auguste said finally. "That is what I told Rousseau. In 1 week, you will vanish. I will provide money, documentation, to help you reach the north, perhaps Philadelphia or Boston. In return, you never contact me again. Never reveal what you know about this transaction. Never speak of your time in this house." "Agreed. And Marguerite, or Eleanor, or whatever your true name is," Auguste paused, his expression hardening. "If I discover you have betrayed this confidence, if you try to use what you know against me, I will spend every resource I have hunting you down. Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly, Monsieur Levo." They did not shake hands. The relationship between them did not allow for such equality of gesture. But Auguste saw in Marguerite's amber eyes a flicker of something that might have been respect, and he recognized that this was perhaps the first honest exchange they had shared since she entered his household. Neither could have predicted how this agreement would lead not to Marguerite's escape, but to something far more catastrophic. Because there were others watching, others with plans of their own, and the next 7 days would prove that in New Orleans, in 1844, keeping secrets was infinitely more difficult than either of them imagined. The following morning brought the first indication that events were spiraling beyond Auguste's control. His assistant, a free man of color named Jacques Tremé, who had worked for the Levo family for 15 years, arrived at the office visibly shaken. He had news from the waterfront, news that had already begun spreading through the city's commercial networks like cholera through standing water. Christophe Mercier's warehouse on Chupetula Street had burned during the night. The entire structure, 3 stories of brick and timber filled with merchandise awaiting auction, had been consumed in a conflagration so intense that neighboring buildings suffered damage from the heat alone. Mercier himself had been inside when the fire started, attempting to save account books. He had escaped, but barely, suffering burns to his hands and arms and smoke damage to his lungs that left him unable to speak above a whisper. "The fire inspectors were calling it an accident," Jacques reported, his voice tight with tension. "They say a lamp was knocked over. But Monsieur Levo, there are whispers. People saying the fire was set deliberately, that someone wanted to destroy Mercier's business, his records, his ability to operate." Auguste felt ice forming in his chest. Who would do such a thing? That is what everyone is asking. But, monsieur, there is more. 2 of Mercier's business associates were seen near the warehouse shortly before the fire began. Both men are now missing. No one has seen them since last night. Their families are searching the city. Auguste dismissed Jacques and sat alone, his mind racing. A fire that destroyed Mercier's business, 2 men missing. And all of this happening just one day after Auguste had agreed to help Marguerite disappear. The timing felt less like coincidence and more like orchestration. He sent for Marguerite. When she arrived, he studied her face carefully, searching for any sign of foreknowledge or satisfaction. Her expression remained neutral, almost serene. "Did you know about the fire?" Auguste asked bluntly. "What fire?" "Christophe Mercier's warehouse burned last night. His business is destroyed. 2 men are missing." Marguerite was silent for a moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "I knew nothing about this. But I am not surprised." "Explain." "Mercier has enemies, Monsieur Levo. Men he has ruined through business dealings, families he has destroyed through strategic manipulation. If someone decided to strike at him, there would be no shortage of people with motive. The only surprise is that it took this long. You think this is unrelated to our situation?" "I think," Marguerite said carefully, "that in a city like New Orleans, violence and commerce walk hand in hand. Fires happen, men disappear. Sometimes these events connect to larger patterns, and sometimes they are simply the random cruelties of urban life. Which this is, I cannot say." Auguste wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that Mercier's misfortune was separate from the complex web of secrets surrounding Marguerite's true identity. But his instincts, honed by 3 decades in a ruthless business, told him otherwise. Something larger was moving beneath the surface of these events, something he did not yet understand. The next morning brought worse news. Etienne Rousseau's eldest son, a young man of 28 named Henri, was found dead in his bed. The family physician could determine no cause. Henri had been in perfect health the evening before, had shown no signs of illness, no symptoms of distress. He had simply died sometime during the night, as if his heart had decided to stop beating for no reason medical science could identify. The death sent shockwaves through New Orleans society. Henri Rousseau had been a popular figure, handsome and charming, known for his skill at cards and his eye for valuable merchandise. His funeral would be one of the social events of the season, with half the city's elite attending to pay respects and the other half attending to be seen paying respects. Auguste attended the funeral 3 days later, standing in the crowded pews of St. Louis Cathedral, while the priest delivered a eulogy that emphasized Henri's youth and promise. He watched Etienne Rousseau, a broken man barely able to stand, supported by his wife and remaining children. The grief was real, devastating, absolute. But Auguste also noticed who else was watching the funeral. In the shadows of the cathedral's side chapel stood a woman he did not recognize, well-dressed but veiled, observing the ceremony with an intensity that suggested more than casual interest. When Auguste tried to get a better look at her, she melted away into the crowd, disappearing before he could position himself for clearer observation. After the service, Auguste found himself standing next to Christophe Mercier near the cathedral steps. Mercier's hands were still bandaged from the warehouse fire, his face showing the strain of pain and financial catastrophe. "A terrible tragedy," Auguste said, the required social pleasantry. Mercier turned to look at him, and Auguste saw something in those eyes that made him want to step backward: rage, suspicion, and something else that might have been fear. "Yes," Mercier said, his damaged voice rasping. "Terrible. First, my warehouse burns with 2 of my associates inside. Their bodies were found this morning, by the way, in the ruins. Then Henri Rousseau dies mysteriously in his sleep, all within 1 week. Tell me, Auguste, do you believe in coincidence?" "I believe misfortune sometimes arrives in clusters." "Misfortune?" Mercier's laugh held no humor. "Is that what you call it?" "I call it orchestrated. Someone is moving against us, Auguste. Against all 3 of us. Someone who understands our businesses, our vulnerabilities, our secrets. And I think we both know who that someone must be." Auguste said nothing, unwilling to confirm or deny Mercier's suspicions in such a public setting. "Your new acquisition," Mercier continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that made Auguste lean closer despite himself. "The woman, Marguerite. She is at the center of this. I do not know how yet, but I am certain of it. And unless we act quickly, unless we neutralize whatever threat she represents, we will all end up like Henri Rousseau, dead for reasons no physician can explain. You are overwrought with grief and pain, Auguste said firmly. You are seeing connections that do not exist. Am I? Then explain how my warehouse burns the same night you and I have competing interests in the same slave. Explain how Rousseau's son dies just days after Rousseau made you an offer for that same slave. These are not random events, Auguste. They are messages, warnings. And if we do not act, the next death will be one of ours. Before Auguste could respond, Mercier turned and walked away, leaving Auguste standing on the cathedral steps, feeling as though the ground beneath him had become uncertain. That evening, Auguste confronted Marguerite directly. He found her in the third-floor room, standing at the window as he had observed before, looking out over the city with that expression of patient waiting. 2 men dead, Auguste said without preamble. 2 more bodies found in Mercier's warehouse, all within 1 week of your arrival in my household. Mercier thinks you are responsible. He thinks you are somehow orchestrating these events. Marguerite turned from the window. In the gaslight, her amber eyes seemed to glow with their own luminescence. What do you think, Monsieur Levo? I think I want the truth. All of it. No more evasions, no more carefully worded half-answers. If you know anything about these deaths, you will tell me now. Marguerite studied him for a long moment. Then she moved to the small writing desk in the corner of the room and retrieved something from a drawer. She handed it to Auguste. It was a letter, the paper expensive, the handwriting elegant. Auguste read, "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the first phase of our plan has succeeded. You are positioned exactly where we need you to be, in the household of Auguste Levo. The other pieces are moving into place. Mercier's warehouse will burn on the specified date. The deaths we discussed will occur according to schedule. You need only maintain your position and wait. Soon, very soon, justice will be delivered to all 3 of the men who profited from your enslavement. And when it is done, you will be free in ways that go beyond mere legal status. You will be avenged, with love and determination, M." Auguste's hands shook as he held the letter. M. Who was M, and what plan was being described here? Phase 1, scheduled deaths, justice delivered. Who wrote this? Auguste demanded. Someone who loves me, Marguerite said quietly. Someone who has been working for 3 years to undo what was done to me. Someone who understands that men like you, Rousseau and Mercier, operate within a system that protects your crimes while punishing your victims. Someone who decided that if legal justice was unavailable, other forms of justice would have to suffice. You are talking about murder. I am talking about consequences. You purchased a free-born woman, Monsieur Levo. You did so knowing the transaction was suspicious, knowing the price was too high, knowing something was wrong. You did not care, because you wanted what I represented. Rousseau tried to buy me knowing my enslavement was illegal, willing to profit from that illegality. Mercier planned to use me for blackmail and extortion. All 3 of you saw a woman in chains and saw only opportunity. None of you saw a human being with rights, with dignity, with people who loved her enough to seek revenge on her behalf. Who is M? Auguste asked again, his voice tight. Someone you will never find. Someone who moves through this city like smoke, unseen and unstoppable. By the time you realize the full extent of what has been set in motion, it will be too late to protect yourself. I could turn you over to the authorities right now, tell them everything. You could. But what would you tell them? That you purchased a slave who turned out to be free-born? That would expose your own crime. That you possess a letter suggesting a conspiracy. Written by whom? Sent from where? The letter has no signature beyond an initial, no identifying details. And Monsieur Levo, if you act against me, if you harm me or attempt to expose what you think you know, then whoever M is will move against you with everything they have planned. Right now, you are not the primary target, but you could become one very quickly. Auguste stared at her, seeing her fully for perhaps the first time. Not a victim, not a slave, but a woman at the center of an elaborate conspiracy, a plan for revenge that had been years in the making and had already resulted in multiple deaths. What happens now? Auguste asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, Marguerite said, you keep our agreement. In 4 more days I disappear. You report me as a runaway. You cooperate with whatever authorities might investigate, showing them the false documentation Fournier provided. You play the role of the deceived merchant who suffered a financial loss, and in return, whoever M is will ensure that the consequences planned for Rousseau and Mercier do not extend to you. And if I refuse? If I decide to fight this, rather than submit? Marguerite walked back to the window, her silhouette dark against the gaslight filtering up from the street below. Then you will discover exactly how vulnerable you truly are, Monsieur Levo. You will discover that the wealth you have accumulated, the reputation you have built, the power you think you possess, all of it can be stripped away by someone with patience, intelligence, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Auguste left her room feeling as though he had aged a decade in the span of one conversation. He understood now that he had never been in control of this situation. From the moment Fournier walked into his office, perhaps from before that moment, forces had been moving that Auguste could neither comprehend nor combat. He had 4 days until Marguerite's planned disappearance, 4 days to decide whether to honor their agreement or attempt some alternative action. 4 days to discover if he could protect himself and his family from whatever consequences M had planned. Those 4 days would prove far more eventful than Auguste could have imagined, because the conspiracy surrounding Marguerite went deeper than anyone suspected, and the true revelation, the moment when all the careful planning would be exposed, was approaching fast. On the morning of the 3rd day, Etienne Rousseau was found dead in his office. Unlike his son's mysterious passing, Rousseau's death was violent and unmistakable. Someone had entered his office during the night and stabbed him repeatedly. The room was destroyed, papers scattered, furniture overturned, blood splashed across the walls in patterns that suggested desperate struggle. The City Watch declared it a robbery gone wrong. Money had been taken from Rousseau's safe. Documents were missing. Clearly, some criminal had broken in seeking valuables and been surprised by Rousseau's presence, leading to violence. But Auguste knew better. This was no random robbery. This was assassination made to look like something else. This was the plan Marguerite had alluded to, the justice that M had promised to deliver. 2 of the 3 men were now dead. Only Auguste remained. That afternoon, he made his decision. He would honor his agreement with Marguerite. He would help her disappear, not out of mercy, not out of any moral epiphany, but out of sheer survival instinct. Whatever force was moving against the 3 traders had proven itself capable of orchestrating fires, mysterious deaths, and brutal murder. Auguste had no desire to become the next victim in whatever grand design M had created. But Auguste also made a second decision, one that Marguerite and her mysterious benefactor could not have anticipated. He would document everything, every detail of the transaction with Fournier, every conversation with Marguerite, every suspicion and observation. He would create a record that, if he died under suspicious circumstances, would be delivered to authorities with instructions to investigate thoroughly. If M wanted him dead, Auguste would ensure that his death brought exposure rather than obscurity. It was the only leverage he had left. That evening, Marguerite came to his office as arranged. They finalized the details of her disappearance. Auguste provided her with $500 in gold, forged papers identifying her as a free woman of color traveling to visit family in Philadelphia, and the name of a sympathetic ship captain who asked few questions about his passengers. "Tomorrow night," Auguste said. "There is a ship departing for Baltimore at midnight. Be on it." "I will be," Marguerite said. "And Monsieur Levo, for what it is worth, I am sorry you were caught up in this. You are not the worst of the three men. Perhaps that is why you are being given the chance to survive." "Who is M?" Auguste asked one final time. "Please, I need to know who has orchestrated all of this." Marguerite smiled. That same cold smile he had seen before. "You will discover the answer soon enough. Everyone will. The truth is about to emerge in ways that will shock this entire city, and when it does, you will understand that what happened here was never really about revenge. It was about something much larger." She left his office, and Auguste never saw her again. The next evening, Marguerite vanished from the Levo household. Auguste reported her missing the following morning, played his role as the outraged merchant suffering a financial loss, cooperated with the slave catchers who briefly searched for her before giving up. And then Auguste waited for whatever revelation Marguerite had promised. Waited to see if he would survive whatever final phase of M's plan remained to be executed. The revelation came 3 days later, and it was more devastating than anything Auguste could have imagined. The revelation arrived not through dramatic confrontation, but through a simple newspaper article published in the New Orleans Daily Picayune on March 28, 1844. Auguste read it over breakfast, his coffee growing cold as the words on the page rearranged his understanding of everything that had transpired. The headline read, "Shocking Exposé, the Whitmore Scandal and the Trade in Freeborn Citizens." The article, written by a journalist named Thomas Bancroft, detailed a conspiracy that had operated for years along the Atlantic coast. A network of corrupt traders, attorneys, and family members who had systematically enslaved freeborn people, primarily mixed-race individuals whose ambiguous appearance made their status difficult to prove. The article named names, provided documentation, included testimonies from victims who had escaped and from accomplices who had turned witness. Baptiste Fournier was identified as a key player in this network, a specialist in creating false documentation and moving illegally enslaved people through various markets before their cases could be investigated. The article described how Fournier worked with desperate families who would sell their own relatives to discharge debts, how he forged papers that appeared legally unassailable, how he targeted specific buyers in specific cities who would pay premium prices without asking uncomfortable questions. Auguste Levo was named in the article. So was Etienne Rousseau, identified as having purchased 3 illegally enslaved people over the previous 5 years. Christophe Mercier was described as having knowingly participated in extortion schemes, targeting families trying to recover enslaved relatives. But the true shock came in the final paragraphs of the article. The section that explained how this information had been gathered, how the conspiracy had been exposed, and who had orchestrated the exposure. The investigation had been led by a group of abolitionists, operating secretly in multiple southern cities. They had spent 3 years documenting the network, gathering evidence, identifying victims. Their work had been coordinated by a woman identified only as M. Devereaux, a widow from Charleston whose daughter had been illegally enslaved and sold through Baptiste Fournier. M. Devereaux had not simply sought to rescue her daughter. She had engineered an elaborate plan to expose the entire network, to create a scandal so explosive that it would force legal action against traders who had operated with impunity for years. She had planted her daughter, known in documents as Marguerite, but born Eleanor Whitmore Devereaux, in the household of Auguste Levo, specifically to gather evidence of his business practices, to document his connections to other corrupt traders, to position herself at the center of a conspiracy she intended to bring crashing down. The deaths that had occurred were not murders, the article explained, but rather the consequences of panic and guilt. Henri Rousseau had apparently taken his own life after being confronted with evidence of his father's crimes, unable to bear the shame. Etienne Rousseau had been killed not by M. Devereaux's agents, but by business associates who feared exposure of their own involvement in illegal trading. Christophe Mercier's warehouse had been set ablaze by creditors seeking to destroy evidence of their complicity. Devereux herself had orchestrated none of these deaths directly. She had simply set in motion a sequence of revelations that caused the entire corrupt network to consume itself from within. The article concluded with a statement attributed to Devereux. For 3 years, I watched my daughter live as a slave, knowing she was free-born, knowing her enslavement was criminal, and knowing that no legal authority would help us because the system itself profits from such crimes. I realized that exposure was the only weapon available to those without power. These men thought themselves untouchable. They believed their wealth and status protected them from consequences. They were wrong. The truth, once revealed, cannot be hidden again. And the shame of their crimes will follow their families for generations, just as the trauma of illegal enslavement follows its victims forever. Auguste set down the newspaper with shaking hands. He understood now. Everything. The careful planning, the patient positioning, the way Marguerite had gathered information while appearing to simply serve in his household. The letter he had read had not been from some mysterious benefactor. It had been from Marguerite to herself, a piece of theatre designed to make Auguste believe he was caught in a conspiracy larger than one woman could orchestrate alone. M was Marguerite. Marguerite was M, the widow, Devereux. She had been the mastermind all along. The brilliance of it struck Auguste, even through his horror. By allowing him to believe in a shadowy organization, by creating the impression of multiple actors working in coordination, Marguerite had made the conspiracy seem unstoppable. Auguste had never considered that one woman, working largely alone with perhaps a few abolitionist contacts, could engineer something so elaborate. She had not needed to kill anyone. She had simply needed to expose the right truths to the right people at the right times. The guilty had destroyed themselves in their panic to avoid exposure. The network had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption once light was shone upon it. The consequences of the newspaper article rippled through New Orleans like an earthquake. Federal marshals arrived within days to begin investigations. Bank accounts were frozen. Property was seized. Families scrambled to distance themselves from implicated relatives. The social fabric of the city's elite tore apart as everyone attempted to prove they had known nothing, suspected nothing, participated in nothing criminal. Auguste Levo found himself under intense scrutiny. His business records were examined, his past transactions questioned. His reputation, built over 30 years, crumbled in a matter of weeks. No criminal charges were ultimately filed against him. The evidence suggested he had been deceived by Fournier's documentation, that he had purchased Marguerite, believing her to be legally enslaved. But the stain of association remained. Clients abandoned him. Business partners severed connections. His wife's family, prominent Creoles, who had always viewed the Levos as slightly beneath their station, publicly disowned the marriage. Within 6 months, Auguste was forced to liquidate his business. The Levo auction house on Chartres Street, where 3 generations had built a commercial empire, was sold to a family from Mobile, who immediately changed the name and purged all association with the previous owners. The house on Esplanade Avenue followed, sold at a loss to cover debts that materialized once Auguste's credit collapsed. Auguste moved with Marie-Claude to a modest home in the Marigny, a neighborhood that represented a catastrophic fall from their previous status. They lived quietly, their remaining years marked by the silence of people who had lost not just wealth, but identity. When Auguste died in 1851, his obituary was 3 lines long, making no mention of his business career or his family's history in New Orleans. The Levo name, once synonymous with prestige, had been erased from the city's memory. The fate of Marguerite, or Eleanor Devereux, remained unclear for years. The newspaper article had protected her identity sufficiently that she was able to vanish into the north without immediate pursuit. There were rumors, sightings, stories of a woman matching her description, working with underground railroad networks, helping other illegally enslaved people escape to freedom. Some claimed she had gone to Europe, living in Paris under an assumed name. Others, insisted she had died shortly after the scandal, worn out by the ordeal of her enslavement and the weight of orchestrating its exposure. The truth emerged only decades later, after the Civil War had ended and the social order that had enabled such crimes had been destroyed. An elderly woman living in Philadelphia granted an interview to a northern newspaper in 1872. She identified herself as Eleanor Devereux. She was, by then, 54 years old, her amber eyes dimmed by time, but still holding that same unsettling intelligence that had so troubled Auguste Levo nearly 3 decades earlier. In the interview, Eleanor confirmed that she had indeed orchestrated the 1844 scandal. She described the 3 years she had spent planning, researching, positioning herself. She explained how she had manipulated Fournier into selling her to Levo specifically, knowing that Levo's connections to Rousseau and Mercier would allow her to gather evidence against all 3 simultaneously. She detailed how she had used her time in the Levo household to copy documents, to record conversations, to build the case that would eventually expose the entire network. But the interviewer asked the question that readers most wanted answered. Had she felt guilt about the deaths that resulted? About Henri Rousseau's suicide? About Etienne Rousseau's murder? About the financial ruin that befell families connected to the scandal? Eleanor's response was recorded verbatim. "I feel grief for Henri Rousseau. He was an innocent caught in crimes, not of his own making. But I feel no guilt. The men who profited from illegal enslavement created the circumstances that led to those deaths. They built a system so corrupt that its exposure caused collapse. That collapse was inevitable once the truth emerged. I simply chose when and how the truth would emerge. As for the financial ruin of families, I would ask those who express sympathy for them to consider this. Where was the sympathy for my family when I was stolen? Where was the concern for my financial ruin when I was sold like livestock? Where was the mercy for the hundreds of other freeborn people trafficked through this network? The difference is that those families had choices. They chose to participate in evil for profit. I had no choice at all. So no, I feel no guilt. I feel only satisfaction that justice, however imperfect, was finally served." The interviewer noted that Eleanor had never married, never had children of her own. She had devoted her life after 1844 to advocacy work, supporting former slaves, working with legal aid societies, documenting cases of illegal enslavement for use in future prosecutions. She had transformed her trauma into purpose, her rage into systematic change. The network that Eleanor exposed in 1844 did not disappear entirely. Such systems adapt rather than die. But the scandal made illegal enslavement significantly more risky, more difficult to orchestrate without fear of exposure. Traders became more cautious. Documentation was scrutinized more carefully. And some families, confronted with the moral horror of what the Whitmore scandal revealed, chose to withdraw from the trade entirely. The story of Marguerite, the most expensive woman auctioned in New Orleans, became a legend whispered in certain circles. To abolitionists, she was a hero, a woman who had weaponized her own enslavement to strike back at the system that had stolen her freedom. To traders and their sympathizers, she was a dangerous manipulator whose actions had destroyed innocent families and undermined legitimate commerce. The truth, as always, was more complex than either narrative allowed. What cannot be disputed is this: one woman, stripped of her freedom and her identity, managed to orchestrate the exposure of a criminal network that had operated with impunity for years. She did so not through violence, though violence occurred as consequence, not through wealth, as she possessed none, not through legal authority, as the law offered her no protection. She did so through intelligence, patience, and an absolutely ruthless commitment to seeing justice delivered to those who had wronged her. The auction that took place in March of 1844 was never really about the $13,000 Auguste Levo paid. It was about the price Eleanor Devereux was willing to pay, the sacrifice of years of her life, the risk of permanent enslavement if her plan failed, The burden of knowing her actions would cause deaths and devastation even beyond those who deserved such consequences. That price ultimately proved far higher than $13,000. It was measured in years stolen, trauma endured, and futures destroyed. But Eleanor paid it willingly because she understood something that Auguste Levo and men like him never grasped until too late, that those without power will find ways to seize it, that those denied justice will create their own, and that the appearance of helplessness can be the most effective disguise for someone planning revolution. The auction house where Marguerite was sold no longer exists. The Street Louis Hotel was demolished in 1874. The quarter has transformed beyond recognition. The legal institution of slavery that enabled such crimes was abolished in 1865. But the lesson of Eleanor Devereux's story remains urgently relevant even now. We live in a world that still commodifies human beings, still values some lives over others, still creates systems that protect the powerful while victimizing the vulnerable. The specifics have changed, but the underlying dynamics persist. Those with wealth and status still believe themselves above consequences. Those without power still search for ways to hold the powerful accountable, and sometimes, just sometimes, the powerless find ways to win. What Eleanor understood, what she demonstrated through her carefully orchestrated exposure of the illegal slave trade network, was that information is power when wielded correctly, that patience can be more effective than violence, that the guilty will often destroy themselves if simply given the opportunity through exposure of their crimes. Think about that the next time you hear stories of whistleblowers, of people who risk everything to expose corruption, of those who sacrifice their own safety to bring truth to light. They are following a path that Eleanor Devereux walked in 1844. They are choosing to pay a personal price to ensure that others face the consequences they have too long avoided. The mystery of the most expensive woman auctioned in New Orleans is not really a mystery at all once you understand what was truly being purchased. Auguste Levo thought he was buying a slave. What he actually purchased was his own destruction, carefully packaged and patiently waiting to be delivered. And by the time he realized his mistake, it was far too late to protect himself from the consequences. If you're watching this, if you've stayed with us through this entire journey into one of the darkest corners of American history, then you understand why we do this at the Sealed Room. These stories deserve to be told. These voices deserve to be heard. The uncomfortable truths of our past need to be examined if we are ever going to build a better future. What do you think about Eleanor's methods? Was her revenge justified, or did her actions go too far? How far would you go to seek justice if every legal avenue was closed to you? Share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing different perspectives on these complex historical situations. And if you found this story as compelling and thought-provoking as we did researching it, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the buried scandals and suppressed truths that shaped America. These are the stories that textbooks skip, the people who were erased from official records, the moments when the powerless found ways to challenge power itself. Share this with someone who needs to hear Eleanor Devereux's story. Someone who believes that one person cannot make a difference. Someone who has ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. Show them what one determined woman accomplished in 1844 with nothing but intelligence, courage, and an absolute refusal to accept that her enslavement was the end of her story. Until next time, keep questioning the narratives you have been taught. Keep looking for the voices that were silenced. Keep remembering that history is written by those who survived to tell their version of events. And sometimes, just sometimes, the survivors are the ones who were supposed to disappear forever, but refused to grant that wish to those who tried to erase them.